Okay. Gosh, I'm trying to think of which question to ask first. Um, you said that people who focus on the past have a higher grief score versus people who focus on the future. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, and it would be a good thing for folks to delve fairly deeply into something that Strobe and their work of this kind of dual process of grieving. Um, so there's a lot to those terms. So when I say focusing on the past, I would say how much I miss the individual, how much right now I need the hand holding, some of those things that beget a lot of what you and I cry about when we hear the character on stage or on the movie talking about, right, as it pulls us in. So that loss oriented coping is the one of the two kind of focuses that they have available in their work. The other one is the future is more so, it's called restoration oriented. It has to do with attending to what needs to be done right now, to moving on with the grief in tow. It's not moving on from, which I think from the outside in, when we're around those who lose something or they're sad or they're whatever, we use the dumb phrases like get over it or whatever. It's a move on with. And I actually, Rex, I have this kind of silly thing I do with students to kind of punctuate this, but I'll kind of draw on a whiteboard. I don't know if you can see this, but I'll say, if I were to go through and look at my body weight over a long period of time, I'd probably gain or lose 2 or 3 or 4 pounds. If it's a really good meal, more than that, all throughout the year. I said, how many of you have ever had that tummy bug where you lose like 10 pounds overnight? I said, it's horrendous, but when you finally get back on your feet and you stand up and you kind of put your favorite jeans on, you're like, woo, I like how these feel. But then I asked the question, here's the kicker, how long does it last? They're like, oh, until I have, Subway later that day, it's too salty or whatever. And I said, yeah, we come back to this homeostasis that our body is used to. I said, tweak one detail. Let's say we're going along, and I lose a leg, amputation or whatever, for an accident, for an illness, whatever. I said, okay, I lose. And I said, how much of my leg do I have to lose for 10 pounds? I said, how soon does that come back? And the students are like,
Never.
that's a gross question. I said, yeah. I said, I'm not going to come back to this normal. I'm going to come back to a new normal. So restoration oriented is this idea of I move on with this in mind. I don't pretend it's gone. I don't minimize it. So yeah, that was the difference. But it also, to your question, brought in my real curiosity is how can both the reflecting on how close I was to my spouse, which is in the past, isn't it? And restoration seems to be the one that changes our thing, but it's the loss oriented that was impacting. So I was sitting there thinking, I'm saying, it must be that the relationship continues, even though, oh yeah, that Tuesdays with Maury became a much bigger deal to me. It ends a life. It doesn't end a relationship.
Yeah, I like how you said that the end of a life doesn't end a relationship.
Right.
Death doesn't conquer that.
And Pauline Boss, right? There's no closure. Is that who's said it? Yeah.
Yeah, Pauline Boss said it's a myth. That closure is a myth.
Interesting. This brings me to the next question that I learned about this from personal experience, but I've seen people do it now, especially with the high profile death of Charlie Kirk. But when my mom passed away, this was like 17 years ago. I went through tremendous grief, but I handled it my own way. And I remember that some people were judging how other people were grieving. And I learned like people grieve in very different ways. And it's not fair to judge them. Is there something you could say to that about maybe illuminating the fact that people do grieve very differently?
Oh yeah. Well, and maybe a little wordsmithing to this. I think the grief is going to be fairly similar among people. What you do about it, which is we call that mourning, right? Is going to be very, very different. And some people, just like there are extroverts and there are introverts, I think that you're going to have personalities of grieving styles or so forth. What do you say? My father told me a fascinating story about when he lost his dad. Same day I got my first car, by the way. So that's kind of emblazoned in my mind of when Grandpa passed away. But he said, here I was at the funeral. And he said, my sister's like, it is biblical. It's like weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. And Grandpa was a bigger than life character. Indeed, was going to be some voids in people's lives. But my dad, his story, he said, Ryan was dry, no tears. He said it was all business. Maybe he was too, to your other question, restoration oriented. He's like, what are we doing to take care of this? We can take care of grandma, all these other things. And he said, I went through that, and a couple of times one of my sisters would come up and she just like, won't you just cry with us, kind of a thing? Like, what is your problem? And it's like, I'm not doing this to try to be tough or anything. He said, I went through it. A few weeks later, he said there was a BYU game or a Jazz game or something. I would have loved to have had Dad's take on how it went. He says, I went and I picked up my phone and I started to dial his phone number. And I realized for the first time, he wouldn't pick up to get a phone call. And he said, Ryan, I just lost it. He says, I just wept. He says, the dam broke, whatever. There may also, Rex, and not just be the timing of things, but we've talked about how Kubler-Ross identified that you've got, anger and denial and acceptance, and they're all leaved in. And I think in some ways, when she got to the end of her life, she said, well, I think I blew it because people feel like they have to be, no, I have to be angry first before I can accept it or whatever else. But what she did was identified that grief isn't only tears, but that's not the only way that we feel things. The way we're going to express ourselves through our mourning is we might scream out, we might punch a pillow, we may go on a walk, we may go on a run, we may go back to work, we may disappear for a long period of time. And for anybody who's thinking about inside of themselves, I don't feel sad, the way that it comes out in you is perfectly okay. For those who are around somebody else who's grieving, don't push them to be sad. Don't push them to get over it or move along with it. If they're not hurting themselves and they're not hurting somebody else, whatever they're doing is just fine. And as we allow individuals, ourselves included in this, by the way, allow individuals to express and feel this grief, I think it's a healthier and probably in the future, a safer space for people to be able to be sad and just let it kind of go. Let it go, I'm not thinking Disney. Let it flow. Let it move its way through as we meet our new normal.
Yeah, I can relate to that too, because I remember going through that experience and just crying for like a week randomly at anything, and then getting to my mom's funeral a week later, and I remember standing up to kind of give a little bit of a eulogy and just being like, oh my gosh, I'm emotionally exhausted. Like, I just can't cry anymore. I can't. That was just an interesting thing to go through, but also realizing, people do grieve differently, and it's not fair to judge other people how they grieve, especially public figures too nowadays. So,
Oh yeah, brutal.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ryan.
Yeah.
So much for coming. This is an incredible conversation.
It's been a pleasure. It's been fun. It's been fun to think about, to revisit, to review, and to have that conversations. You too. It's been awesome. Thank you for including me.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks for joining us today. Hey, do us a favor and take a second to subscribe to our podcast and the Utah Marriage Commission YouTube channel at Utah Marriage Commission, where you can watch this and every episode of the show. Be sure to smash the like button, leave a comment, and share this episode with a friend. You can also follow and interact with us on Instagram at Stronger Marriage Life and Facebook at Stronger Marriage. So be sure to share with us which topics you loved or which guests we should have on the show next. If you want even more resources to improve your marriage or relationship connection, visit strongermarriage.org, where you'll find free workshops, e-courses, in-depth webinars, relationship surveys, and more. Each episode of Stronger Marriage Connection is hosted and sponsored by the Utah Marriage Commission at Utah State University. And finally, a big thanks to our producer, Rex Polanis, and the team at Utah State University, and you, our audience. You make this show possible. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the Utah Marriage Commission.